It was just as it had been told to them. The angel had come down to the shepherds, told them that their Messiah had been born, and to look for him, swaddled in a manger. I imagine a whole throng of heavenly beings collectively speaking at you about the glory of God is at minimum a little awkward. So I get that the shepherds, they needed a little bit of time to take a minute to think about what they were going to do, to talk it out. If it had just been one angel, I imagine it would have been a lot easier to take in. But a multitude of heavenly array seems like a lot. I imagine the shepherds standing there, frozen, looking at each other like, "Are you seeing this?" I am sure that the concept of angels and heavenly beings were not new to the shepherds. Being a shepherd in first century Palestine was not considered a favored position in society by any means. The Jewish leaders would criticize the shepherds even as they cared for their flock because it would disrupt their ability to adhere to the strict Jewish laws like Sabbath. But the shepherds, they would have been faithful to the best of their ability in every way that they could, and would have probably heard stories of God's messengers, like angels, showing up through biblical life. But it's one thing to imagine something. It's an entirely other thing to experience it. So, the shepherds discuss and decide to head towards Bethlehem. Now, when I discern, I like to walk. I put my body in motion so that my mind can focus, because I'm programmed the other way around. At the end of a work day, I will have barely moved from my desk, but I'll have like 100 tabs open. So when I'm discerning, when I'm listening for God, meaning, again, when I'm using my faith to help me understand the world, I like to move. If I were the shepherds, as I was walking towards Bethlehem, I think I'd have a lot of questions. But the one that would give me greatest pause would be, why did the angel say the baby was swaddled? And more importantly, why is the Messiah in a manger? You have those questions too? I know I would. The shepherds would have been intimately familiar with mangers. They're drafty and dirty. They're suitable for animals. I imagine they may have even slept in one a time or two themselves over the years. But surely, they misheard the angel. This was a baby, the Messiah, more akin to religious rulers than a shepherd, surely. So they walk in discernment, seeking the truth of the Messiah, hoping for the truth of their faith. When I walk, I notice small things rather than big things. I will see more clearly a leaf's colors change from the stem to the tip. I'll notice a feather in the air after a flock of birds take off in unison, or that the brick on the building next to mine, there's one that's just slightly crooked. I'll notice the small things, but I will miss the bigger things almost entirely. Like a whole crowd of people that have gathered around a new restaurant, or a loud, flashy car that goes by, or even a blockade. I've walked into a couple as I've been walking. My mind, when I discern and walk, is set on the singular and will sometimes miss the significant. In my mind, the shepherds walk right past the manger, at least at first. And then, from the not too far distance, a baby cries, and the shepherds turn around. Could this be the one they think to themselves. Here, in the dirt, the blood, the smell of animals. Regardless, he deserves more, doesn't he? More than this, surely. And then they see the baby, swaddled tight. You cannot tell where the cloth begins or ends as it circles this tiny and vulnerable infant. It's an unending embrace from adoring parents who probably look on in grateful exhaustion. It's a really human experience, but it's exactly as the angel had said. Nothing about this birth seems extraordinary, apart from the question that remains. Is this my sovereign God? The one thing to imagine, it is one thing to imagine meeting God. It's an entirely other thing to experience it. This baby, both exposed and embraced, was and is indeed the Messiah, the Christ child, the sovereign God. And this ordinary mess of birth is the first ordained Christ Mass, the first worship of Jesus. And the first to author the liturgy of his life, to sing his praises, bless his holiness, were not nobles or scholars. They weren't even the most faithful to the laws. The first congregants at this Christ Mass were people that could see themselves in his story. Shepherds. People whom others passed by, mocked, used but undervalued. And they were invited by angels. Go, walk and discern for yourselves. Here is a map of faith, they said, with a salvific destination. Just look for the human experience. And they did. And so should we. The human experience is what God is calling us into, which seems it's a little like a funny thing. It's a weird thing to have to tell humans, right? I don't have to tell the birds that I see on my walk to fly. They just do it. But humans seem determined to look for the holy in every place but the human. God creates us of dust, and we ask when we turn to diamonds. That tiny baby had done nothing but survive being born, which is not now, nor has it ever been, an uncomplicated and risky task. And regardless of who he might be, Mary loved Jesus for who he was, hers. Even when she knew that one day he would eventually be ours too. But through the years, we have polished this manger into a castle and forced this sweet, brown, poor refugee child to grow up too soon, as we are wont to do nowadays to children whose stories start like Jesus's. And we have altogether stopped asking the question that still remains. Is this my sovereign God? The answer was and is still yes, it is. The answer remains even when we forget to ask the question, because our humanness and the humanness of God known through the life of Jesus Christ is a tethered connection to the spark of the divine that resides within us all. We just need to connect with one another to experience it and remind ourselves that it is there. On a walk last week, I went to drop off some gift cards at my local community refrigerator. And when I got there were more people there than I had cards for. So I just stacked them up and placed them on the table next to the refrigerator. I was slightly embarrassed that I just didn't have enough for everyone. I went and I sat down and just prayed, as I do when I visit that space. And a woman who was there, shepherding her children towards that area, reached out and grabbed the whole stack that I had just put down. And before I could even recognize what she was doing, what was happening, she gave that whole stack to the old man behind her. He took them and they hugged and they smiled in a way that made the world feel anew. This woman birthed love into this space, a place where people come when there is no room for them elsewhere. And without another word, she turned back to the refrigerator and started to fill a bag for herself to take home. When she was done, we made eye contact and smiled at each other. I don't live in her building, but we live in the same region, per se. And we've seen each other at the local bodega in the park around the corner. So she came over and sat next to me, and both of us were masked. And she said, "He comes here every day and takes one thing, just one thing, and that's what he eats for the day. I doubt that he will keep those cards, but," she said, "he deserves the chance for more than just that one thing." Y'all, I walked away stunned, made anew, and singing her praises. I walked away asking myself the question that had been and has been on the minds of all of us, from the shepherds to myself, the minds that resided at that first Christ Mass, worshipers that were then and worshipers that are now. Is this my sovereign God? Friends, again, it is one thing to imagine working for God, but it is an entirely other thing to see God at work. So for the newness that is this day, for the human stories that help us see the holy connectedness, and for you, O God, for you, O God, our sovereign God, we celebrate this day, the second day of your Christ Mass. Amen and amen.